There were many heroes the night the Titanic sank, but for some, the greatest of these was Fifth Officer Harold Lowe. What made him a hero? And who was the owner of the black alligator purse recovered from 12,000 feet below the Atlantic Ocean? And what of the steam whistles recovered from the wreck site? Would their voice ever be heard again? All this on Titanic, Stories from the Deep. The wreck of RMS Titanic was discovered 3,800 meters deep in the Atlantic Ocean. Over 5,500 artifacts and personal items have since been recovered, all reminders of the passengers and crew who set sail that fateful day. These objects tell very real stories of love, survival, mystery, and fate. This is Titanic, Stories from the Deep. Over 100 years later, Titanic's mysteries still tantalize the world over. There were 4 sets of whistles aboard the Titanic, last sounded at noon on April 14th, 1912. This set was the only one recovered with its pieces still intact. The conserved whistles went on tour in Titanic exhibits until 1998, but they had not sounded since that day in 1912. Would their voice ever be heard again? Since that fateful night, the story of Titanic has infused a sense of wonder into the imaginations of millions worldwide. For one young man, a fascination with Titanic's whistles was only one part of a larger passion for all things Titanic.
In 1979, SOS Titanic was on television. Even then, I was just drawn into the story. The most beautiful ship of its time, sinking on its first trip, on its maiden voyage, an inconceivable thing. It's just a compelling story. One would think it would be fiction, but it was real. Some people have called the interest in Titanic fever. Once it's in the blood, it never disappears.
In 1998, the Titanic exhibition came to Boston, Massachusetts, and Tarn Stefanos got to turn his passion into a career when he got a job as a Titanic historian.
It was an amazing experience to work with and around objects from the Titanic. It made it a tangible thing, things that had a direct connection to passengers or crew. No longer some abstract, faded photograph, but something real and something there.
One of the featured artifacts at the exhibit was the complete whistle set.
When one of the chimes was in its container, I just had to reach out and touch it and make that tactile connection to Titanic. And you figure the voyage these whistles went through, high atop the forward funnel, which collapsed in the final moments of the sinking, plunging 2.5 miles to the sea floor. And years later, it's recovered, and there it is in front of me, and I touch it, and it's as if in some eternal circle, I'm linked to the Titanic, something that has always been part of me.
But little did Tarn know the part he was to play in bringing the whistles back to life and spread the wonder of Titanic to thousands. In 1998, the heads of the Titanic exhibit in St. Paul, Minnesota, decided to call upon the services of the Kallenberg brothers in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. Their objective: determine if the recovered whistle set could be sounded for the first time since 1912.
The Kallenberg brothers started in 1895. My great-grandfather was an internal combustion engine pioneer. In the 1930s, during the Depression, they expanded into other things. So there were sound signaling equipment, air horns, and that's the biggest part of it now. So it was kind of a natural fit for us to do something with the Titanic Whistle Project.
We were invited over just to see if they were in any condition to be blown.
I went to St. Paul with Zach, and we took a look at them, and we knew that they had been restored, at least, cosmetically, they had been cleaned up for display. But internally, we didn't know if they'd be full of, barnacles or crud or whatever.
It was pretty cool, just the size of them. Almost 5 feet tall with the manifold going up. About 750 pounds, I estimated.
Just to be able to physically handle them would be difficult. I think they were the largest whistle ever made. We didn't know what kind of shape they were in until we saw the x-rays. I mean, shining a flashlight up there didn't help a whole lot, and nobody at the time had the camera probe or anything, you know, that sophisticated.
I was curious as to see if there was any air pockets inside the castings, because sometimes castings are hollow.
2 of the whistles were completely intact. There were no issues. I think the largest one in the center, because the stems of the whistle were hollow. The stem is the part that really holds up that big dome, that big bell shape you see on it. That part of the largest whistle had imploded, but not entirely. You know, just enough where obviously the pressure was relieved and water went in. But they were at least structurally sound enough to start putting some low pressure air through them to see if they would work.
But first, the whistles had to make a 300-mile journey from St. Paul, Minnesota, to the Kallenberg Brothers factory in Two Rivers, Wisconsin.
The boss at the exhibition, he told me, do you want to go along? And so I went.
We had a white Ford cargo van that was like driving a buckboard.
We came back, I think we got back a little after midnight through an ice storm.
I'm a New Englander, I'm used to snow, but this was snow.
You know, we laughed about it on the way, but it really wasn't funny. We had a, you know, priceless artifact in the back of the panel van through an ice storm. It didn't really seem to make a lot of sense. Like, there should have been a safer way to do it.
But they were in really, really good cases, so we didn't have to worry too much. They were safer than we were, let's put it that way.
We got them here and hung on to them overnight in Zach's garage.
You know, my neighbor, Mary Ellen, next day, she came out with the paper. Hey, Zach, it says here in the paper that, you know, the Titanic whistles are in Two Rivers. And then she saw the van. She goes, so what's with the van?
On the night of April 14, 1912, after an iceberg fatally collided with Titanic's starboard side, the initial reaction among passengers wasn't outright horror. Most didn't know how dire the situation really was. But once the evacuation wore on and panic set in, many faces of human nature began to show.
You've got over 2,000, 200 people that are all reacting, responding differently. You see people jumping into lifeboats. You see people even trying to rush the lifeboats. The situation starts to break down as the disaster unfolds.
These people knew that there was a large number of people that weren't going to survive. Most of them realized pretty quickly there wasn't enough boats. How did these people face these situations? What did they do?
When Titanic struck the iceberg at approximately 11:40 p.m., 5th Officer Harold Lowe was asleep in his cabin.
By the time Lowe awakened, he emerged into a fully developed crisis situation, and aware that the situation would deteriorate quite quickly, he went back to his cabin and retrieved his personal firearm, which is a Browning automatic pistol.
Titanic's final resting place lies 12,500 feet below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. At this depth, hungry bacteria feed off the ship's iron, creating what's known as rusticles, rivers of rust dangling off the ship like giant icicles. Scientists say it's only a matter of time until this once mighty ship becomes nothing more than an iron ore shadow on the seafloor. In the year 2000, the Russian submersible Mir-1 did a sweep of Titanic's debris field. The submersible spots a cabin window, which they will discover once belonged to an officer's cabin. On the night of April 14th, 1912, behind a window like this, 5th Officer Harold Lowe slept soundly as the Titanic collided with an iceberg. He would wake up to a ship in a state of panic.
Lowe had gone off watch at 8 o'clock and promptly fell into a very deep sleep.
There was an account that somebody came in and tried to wake him up, and that he was awake and acknowledged it, and then went back to sleep. And he didn't recall this at all. Like he said, I don't remember anybody coming in. He had a great quote in the inquiries where he says, when we go to sleep, we die. Basically saying, yeah, he goes to bed and he passes right out.
So by the time Lowe awakened to hear voices outside his cabin, he could feel by his feet that they were going down by the bow.
When Lowe went back out on deck, he noticed many lifeboats were launched without an officer on board, so Lowe took charge of lifeboat number 14.
When Lowe arrived at the boat, it was already in the process of being loaded. And one of the crew informed him that he'd already had to try and repel people who were trying to press forward and board the boats.
It starts getting a little chaotic. People are pushing and shoving to get in. You had one of the sailors actually took a wooden piece off the tiller and was like basically pushing and prodding people back with this to keep them from piling in.
And Lowe announced that he'd soon put a stop to that. He told anyone who tried to board without his orders, particularly men, that he would shoot them if they attempted to board. And as the boat was being lowered, they could see that there was a large group of men who had crowded round who looked ready to spring.
I think he was concerned with all these people, if they jumped into it, with it being that heavily loaded, that it would buckle under the weight and collapse, and that they'd all fall in the water and die.
So he fired his gun alongside the ship and fired it as they passed each deck to deter any would-be boarders.
In Sydney, Australia, Godfrey Lowe, Harold Lowe's grandson, proudly carries the torch of his grandfather's legacy.
This is the Board of Trade's continuous certificate of discharge, which is essentially the record of my grandfather's service in the Merchant Navy. He was a man's man. He was tough. He had to be. I mean, to run away from home and to go before the mast, living that tough life. And he got this after the Titanic sank, because he lost his original when the Titanic sank, with the first entry being the Titanic. The rating, 5th mate. Date and place of discharge, 15th of April, 1912, at sea.
Harold Lowe had 2 children, one of whom, his son Harold William Lowe, emigrated to Australia as an adult.
We lived on a farm in Tasmania, and my father had a pair of binoculars, and I was allowed to use those, sort of going out hunting rabbits and looking across the field. And one day I saw some engraving on these binoculars. And I thought, what's this? And I read the engraving, and it said, to the real hero of the Titanic, Harold Godfrey Lowe, April 1912. Wow, what's that all about? And so I went and asked my father, and thereby I learnt the full story. What sort of a man was your father?
He was a man of considerable character, of very high ideals, strong principles, and considerable capacity.
He was born in Barmouth, on the west coast of Wales. He was always interested in boats as a young fellow. When he was 14, his father wanted to apprentice him to a merchant in Liverpool. But Harold Godfrey Lowe wasn't having a bar of it. And he ran away from home that night. He got on a small coastal ship off the Welsh coast and apprenticed at the bottom of the food chain and started there. And he worked his way up through the ranks. He made a name for himself because he controlled some difficult situations, as I understand. That toughened the man up. And so by the time he was 28, when he was on the Titanic, he really showed his mettle on that fateful night. Did your father ever say anything about the night of the sinking?
Yes, but he avoided talking about it. He did not wish to talk about it. He did not like people raising the subject unnecessarily. It was an experience in which he did not wish to record.
After protecting Lifeboat 14 from would-be jumpers, Harold Lowe started planning a rescue mission.
Once the ship went down, you had all these horrible cries from the water, and he's like, hey, I need to go back and try to save some of these people, but how do I do this safely?
He was saying, look, I don't think there's much fear of suction. I'm ready to go back. I'm prepared to take my chances. Are you?
I understand that people weren't too keen on going back because there were a lot of people thrashing out into the water, and if you went back at that particular point in time, he could have easily been swamped.
In order to return for survivors, Lowe needed to first empty passengers from his lifeboat.
He took it upon himself to gather together a number of the other boats into a little flotilla.
He lashed them together and transferred his passengers into the other boats so he could return to pick up survivors.
If you've ever seen the film by James Cameron, there's a young fella standing on the bow of a lifeboat, waving a torch saying, "Is anybody alive out there?" That was my grandfather.
The water temperature being what it was that night, hypothermia set in almost immediately as soon as people were immersed. By the time he had organised the boat and waited to see if the cries would thin out so it would be safe to proceed into the mass of people that were fighting for their lives, unfortunately there were only a handful of people left alive.
They did find 3 to 4 people that they pulled out of the water, one of whom was either injured or had been in the water too long and ended up passing away, sadly. But he did save multiple people, but it was just too late to get more than that.
He always insisted that he had to wait as long as he did until it was safe to return to pick up survivors.
Because if he'd gone in before, the 40 people in his lifeboat could have ended up being capsized out. You'd end up with 40 more lives lost. And that was a judgment call, a very tough call to make, and he made it.
He'd made some comment about like how he waited too long, and certainly I think that if he would have had a chance to do it over, he might have gone back sooner. He seemed like he was regretful about that.
Out of the 18 lifeboats successfully launched, Harold Lowe's was one of only 2 to go back to pick up survivors. He also ended up saving passengers from collapsible boats A and D, towing them to the rescue ship Carpathia. In the end, only approximately 705 people would survive the disaster. Underwater missions to the Titanic debris site have resulted in thousands of artifacts being brought to the surface. Some artifacts are easily identifiable, but discovering the identities behind the smaller, personal items requires a bit more detective work.
This originally had some handles on each side here, and as you can see, we've got quite a bit of degradation going on with the leather, some loss here. It's still got a great life to it. Well, that alligator skin is so darn thick, it certainly held up very well during all those years under the water.
The mysterious alligator purse was recovered in the year 2000. Researchers wondered who it could have belonged to. As it turned out, the answer was right inside. After sitting at the bottom of the ocean for 88 years, the alligator purse made its way to this top-secret warehouse and into the care of conservator David Galusha.
When an object is found at the bottom of the ocean, it's in a pretty pristine environment. It's 2.5 miles down, it's dark, not a lot of oxygen, not a lot of movement. You pull this object out, well, now it's being hit with oxygen. So it's cataloged, photographed, then it's wrapped up and placed back into the same water that it came out of. And it stays there until it comes back to be conserved. Conservation is taking an object and stabilizing it to a condition where it can stay, constant. It's not deteriorating at the same rate that it was before. Initially, once this went through the desalination, removing the salts through being in salt water down at Titanic, fortunately, because it was tanned so well and the alligator skin is so thick, the tannins that were used kept it pretty supple. So it's simply a matter of removing the impurities and then adding a little more of some of that natural tanning oils to make it soft again.
For world-renowned Titanic conservator Alex Klingelhofer and her team, each artifact has a tale to tell.
When you get into the personal artifacts that have been recovered and you can identify the owner, that gives you a story about that person, why they were traveling, what their hopes and dreams were. You have an understanding of the life that was lost.
Inside the alligator bag, researchers found a cache of papers.
It's very interesting that the paper survived, but we're very happy that it did. Paper at that time was rag paper, a better quality paper, and it was recovered from inside a leather bag, which will protect the paper from the bacterial or microbial communities at the bottom of the ocean. The fact that we still can read the writing is wonderful.
The documents led researchers to believe the owner of the purse was a British woman leaving her old life behind in search of a fresh start. Her name was Marion Meanwell.
Marion Meanwell was a very interesting woman. Her alligator purse, it was like a treasure trove of all of her family papers. This letter here from Wheeler and Sons, it's really a reference letter. It says that she was a good tenant, and of course, as a single woman in Victorian and Edwardian England, she would need to have some sort of reference that would maintain her respectability in society. She knew she was emigrating, and it was really as if someone was taking all of the documents that really meant something, that proved she was an honorable woman, and they're all in this one alligator purse.
Marion Meanwell was a 63-year-old milliner and dressmaker from Yorkshire, England.
Her daughter, Margaret, married an acrobat, and they had relocated to New York City. She and her husband had 2 children, but sadly, he died in April of 1911 from consumption or pneumonia. So Margaret suggests that perhaps her mother could relocate to New York and help her take care of the children while she worked. This is one of the small bags that she had. I would imagine that she made it herself since she was a skilled seamstress. And some of the papers that we see here were found in here.
Marion sold all of her belongings at auction and used the money to buy a ticket on the White Star Line ship, the RMS Majestic. Destination, New York City. But the coal strike of 1912 would change Marion's life forever.
On the 1st of March, nearly 1 million coal miners walked out. And this, of course, had the effect of paralysing it the next 37 days. The coal strike ended on the 6th of April, but it didn't necessarily mean that supplies immediately resumed.
Fate took her hand, and she was transferred by White Star Line from the Majestic, which is crossed off here, to Titanic. She ended up on Titanic and sadly did not survive the sinking.
This is a tragedy that a lot of people don't know about. Passengers, they thought they were very lucky initially to get upgraded or put onto this state-of-the-art vessel. And then quite a large number of those people that did that, of course, didn't survive.
Each artifact that is recovered from the wreck site of Titanic has something important to say.
Here comes the first whistle.
At the Kallenberg Brothers in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. The recovered whistle set is safely placed to ensure no damage.
We had to make sure that there wasn't any debris on the interior where if you put pressure to it, it would hit the bell of the whistle and potentially damage it.
There was a lot of sediment from the bottom of the ocean still in there. So that was the first step. You know, you have to be careful. It's priceless and you don't want to damage it.
We actually set up each of the whistles independently. There's a lot of harmonics, a lot of sound content there. If you were to put them all together immediately, you don't necessarily know that each of the whistles is performing well. We started on low pressure.
The lower pressure, if there's any loose debris in there that you missed, you're not going to do any damage.
Oh, we ain't going no more than that. Huh? It's coming out of there.
That was foremost in our mind. Don't hurt the whistles.
Everyone had to wear ear protection because you wouldn't want to be left deaf by this process.
You hear that?
I had ear protection on, but my ears were ringing for much of the day.
Give it. Give it. I'll just let it run off.
Think of blowing across the lid of a pop bottle. There's no moving parts. It's just physics. It's a musical instrument.
I had the chance to pull the lever to blow, I think it was the center whistle.
With each whistle tested and functional, the team was ready to sound them all together.
People in that room, they knew this was a moment unique.
It looks a lot bigger in person, doesn't it? Mm-hmm.
We're hearing this for the first time since 1912. No one else has heard this.
Go.
It was the most heart-stopping moment because it occurred to me, this is Titanic's voice.
It was a massive sound.
Was that pretty loud?
It put so much air through the test chamber, you literally feel the gust of air pushing you back out the door.
Wow.
It was this tortured, anguished groan from the past. Like the ship was crying out and the voice suddenly broke and then the voice emanated and faded. Almost as if it was crying out from 1912. It was very powerful.
You're welcome. Oh, sure, go ahead.
Once it was determined it was safe to blow the whistles,
They took them back, and it was a couple months until they had everything set up to do the sounding in St. Paul.
Harold Lowe was in charge of Lifeboat 14, towing collapsible D behind him. They reached the rescue ship Carpathia at approximately 7 a.m.
I understand from a number of witnesses that they thought that he was the epitome of British seamanship, British bulldog, a very sort of sound young fellow, calm in a crisis.
Once safely on the Carpathia, Harold Lowe was already being hailed as a hero by grateful passengers.
He was strolling around the deck. One of the fellows who he'd rescued from that sinking lifeboat, a first-class passenger, came up to him and he said, "Thank you so much for saving my life, and I'd like to give you a souvenir." He said, "Now, I've got these gold sovereigns. I'm not going to use them when I get back to America. You have a gold sovereign."
Renee Harris was one of Lowe's warmest admirers. She left in Collapsible D, which was one of the two last lifeboats to be successfully launched.
Renee Harris was a first-class passenger from New York. She was the first female theatrical producer in the United States. Along with her husband, Henry B. Harris, they owned several New York theaters and traveled the world for business and pleasure.
She had broken her arm earlier that day in a fall on the grand staircase, and she was terribly concerned about her own very much loved husband who she had left behind on the ship. So she was in a very, I think, physically and emotionally precarious situation. And she had a chance to observe Lowe that night, and for her, he was, this beacon of sailorly conduct and heroism. Once she was established on the Carpathia, Renee Harris sent for Harold Lowe. She wanted to give him an appreciation of his actions that night. And she suggested to him, look, she had no money on her, but when they got to New York, she wanted to make him a monetary gift. And Harold Lowe was horrified. He said he couldn't accept money for having done his duty.
My grandfather was pretty self-effacing. He didn't look at hero worship. He didn't want to be big-noted. He just quietly went about his business.
But Renee Harris was determined. When the survivors aboard the Carpathia arrived in New York, she arranged one more get-together with Lowe.
And she again pressed on him that she wanted to give him some form of reward. And he refused all these approaches and said, you know, I've only done my duty. I only hollered. Anybody can holler. But I think he hadn't counted on the persistence of Renee Harris.
The word of Titanic's fate spread quickly around the world. Family members anxiously awaited news of their loved ones' whereabouts. Towns and communities across the United Kingdom were missing large numbers of its citizens. 724 of Titanic's crew came from the Southampton area alone, but only 175 would end up coming back. After the tragedy, 5th Officer Harold Lowe returned to his home, the small seaside town of Barmouth, Wales.
When Lowe was finally able to return, he came back to a town that was very proud of their homegrown hero. And they had already been collecting money to present him with an appropriate gift.
On June 21st, 1912, the citizens of Barmouth gathered in the town pavilion to honor the bravery of Harold Lowe.
The theatre was crowded with people all the way up to the roof trusses, eager to see their hero.
This is an album of names of subscribers towards a presentation to Harold Godfrey Lowe, my grandfather, 5th Officer of the RMS Titanic. And it has written in it all the names of the good people of Barmouth who subscribed to the presentation of a gift, which was a chronometer gold watch and chain.
I consider it a privilege to hand you this gold watch and chain as a token of admiration felt to you by a large circle of friends. We are proud of you, and whenever you look upon this watch and feel its ticking, remember that there are warm hearts thinking of you.
And this is the chronometer, which was presented to my grandfather. It's a beautiful watch. Presented to Harold Godfrey Lowe, 5th Officer, RMS Titanic, by friends of his in Barmouth and elsewhere.
It wasn't just the town of Barmouth who honored Lowe that night. Renee Harris sent a surprise token of gratitude to her hero.
In addition to the gold watch and chain, I have much pleasure on behalf of Mrs. Henry B. Harris, New York, to present you with this fine set of marine instruments, which I understand are very valuable and the best money could procure. Your brave and heroic conduct is appreciated on both sides of the Atlantic.
They showed some footage and a band played Nearer My God to Thee, and we had some speeches. Then they turned to Harold Lowe and asked him to address the audience. And he gave them what was described as a smart naval salute. And then he started off with the obligatory thanks to the organising committee and to all those involved. By the time he got to Renee Harris, he was so overcome by emotion, he broke down visibly and couldn't speak further.
He was presented with 3 instruments, the sextants, the telescope and the binoculars. And I have the binoculars in my possession, and a very proud possession it is too. Those other nautical instruments are still in the house that he owned in Deganwy, in Wales.
In Harold Lowe's historic home resides his other grandson and Godfrey's cousin, retired merchant seaman John Lowe.
Here are a couple of pen and ink drawings done by my grandfather, Cedric, and a little one with a sense of humour. Little White Star Line ships, names ended in IC, so he's managed to get seasick out of it.
Harold retired from service in 1931 He lived in this seaside home in Wales with his wife and 2 children until his death in 1944.
They always liked this area because of the boats. He was well known around here. People knew who he was, Titanic Lowe.
After the disaster, Harold Lowe kept in touch with some of the people he saved that night.
Where is it? This is a address book. Mrs. Henry B. Harris, Hudson Theatre, New York, USA. Well, this are the 3 parts of what Mrs. Harris gave us. We've got the sextant here. The scale, it's silver and etched. He might have taken his sextant. I know I did. I used it. The telescope to Harold G. Lowe, the real hero of the Titanic. With deepest gratitude from Mrs. Henry B. Harris, April 1912.
Could he have gone back and saved a few more lives? He'll never know. But he did the best he could. He made the judgment on the night. He was brave and incredible. I'm just so proud of being associated with someone with those genes. I would have loved to have met him. Just really would have loved to.
When word got out the whistles were going to be blown in St. Paul, Titanic enthusiasts from around the world started making travel plans.
My mother, probably about the mid-70s, told me about this wonderful ship called the Titanic. It struck an iceberg and sank with a great loss of lives, but the ship was very beautiful and very elegant. And of course, I found it so fascinating. 1999, we heard that the Titanic exhibit was going to be in St. Paul. Gotta go, right? Loaded up my 2 small boys, my wife. Of course, you gotta take the video camera with.
It was really something. The crowd was massive. I mean, the streets were packed, and I had to say a few words. So I said a few words. I don't think they were very good words.
Today, as we listen to the haunting sound of our last ship, we should reflect on the many heroes and innocent victims who lost their lives on that fateful night.
It was nerve-wracking. I mean, you could look out and you could not see the end of that sea of people going up into downtown. It was a stressful deal. And my thought at the time was, I hope they have enough air.
I was maybe 50 feet or so from the whistles. And the first time they didn't really do a countdown, they just said, here we go, and they blew them.
The reaction was a roar from the crowd. There was silence when people realized, this is Titanic we're hearing. A voice from the past, a dead voice, suddenly alive.
It was impressive. Far more so than it was when we had them here in our facility because the air was endless. And it's completely different outside. It doesn't sound like that when you're in a test chamber.
We wanted more. 3, 2, 1. And they blew them a lot longer this time, the second time. The crowd applauded and roared.
What moved me about the event in St. Paul was not the sound of the whistles, but the reaction of the people.
It was a happy time and also a sad time. Many people that perished that night, that's also what they heard before the ship sank.
I mean, you see it in pictures and then you see it in real life. It's right there. Brings it home a little bit.
It was like going back in time. I still can't believe it happened.
It was a very meaningful time. We were a part of the new history of the Titanic.
That day in St. Paul would be the last time the whistles were sounded. Due to their fragile condition, it was deemed too risky to attempt again. But for one glorious day, the sound of Titanic's voice awoke the imaginations of thousands. In a top-secret warehouse in Atlanta, Tarn Stefanos is about to see the artifacts he has been dreaming about for years.
Oh my goodness.
So I am going to
Wow.
see if Tarn knows what these items are. Do you recognize these pieces?
This, I believe, is a fragment from the fireplace in the first-class smoking room.
That's right.
I mean, this is one of the most beautiful rooms on board the ship. And it was utterly devastated when the ship broke apart. This captures the beauty, the intricacy of the carving, but also the devastation. I mean, this fireplace was shattered in the breakup, and yet the beauty is still there.
Yeah.
So it's like a trampled flower almost, in that it has both the horror and the beauty mixed in together.
That's really poetic and very moving. Wow.
I never thought I'd see this in person. This is just astounding. This, I believe, came from the grand staircase.
It did. We also have a few crystals and some tile, but very, very little else that belonged to the grand staircases because it was so destroyed when the ship sank. Right at that point is where it broke apart and fell into the ocean.
To see these pieces in person, artifacts from the two most beautiful areas on board the ship somehow survived to this very day, despite both areas being completely destroyed. It brings the smoking room to me in person, and it brings the grand staircase, and by extension, the people who interacted with these parts of the ship. It's very special.
Like the sound of her whistles fading on the wind, the story of Titanic grows ever more distant as time marches on. 2 weeks after filming his interview, John Lowe died surrounded by those he loved. By preserving his words and memories, and the memories of all those whose lives Titanic touched, as well as through the recovery and conservation of Titanic's artifacts. In this way, Titanic sails on.